I joined Freemasonry because it was a family tradition on both my mother and my father's side of the family, and it was more or less expected as soon as we got to 21 that the males in the family would join.
My friend said, "Why don't you become a Mason? I'll put your name forward." And I said, "Fine, we'll have a laugh and meet each other 4 times a year."
It was a family thing, basically. I saw members of my family were involved, and I couldn't imagine any of those people being involved in anything sinister.
The perception of Freemasonry is that it is a secret society and that you will never ever discover anything about it.
And was very lucky to end up working for Freemasonry.
It helped me understand how what was basically an unknown society to me suddenly become understandable, recognisable, and basically a bit of a letdown in the end. Even my friend who brought me in left about a year later, fundamentally for the same reasons, that he got disillusioned.
By asking the question, I eventually became a Freemason.
Certainly not a secret society. If we are, we're a very strange secret society.
I will go along with the public line that's given to the press that it's a society with secrets. However, the only really secret side of it are those people who are members of Freemason lodges who wish to remain anonymous in that respect.
It's certainly not a secret society in that nobody ever knows about it. Maybe prior to the 1717 it was a secret society for other reasons.
I do public talks on Freemasonry, and these things wouldn't happen if it were a secret society.
I think where the mythology of secrecy came up was in the late 1930s, when we went from being very public, like a lot of things because of the war, to being very private. And in our case, the privacy was much enhanced by fear of what was happening in occupied Europe, where the Nazis were persecuting Freemasons, and many European Freemasons went to labour and concentration camps, and many of them died in those camps and didn't survive. Unhappily, at the end of the war, we remained too private. We also had a deliberate policy of not engaging with the media in the 1950s and 60s, took ourselves out of the public consciousness so that most people, unless they had connections with Freemasonry, didn't know anything about Freemasonry. And of course, people tend to fear what they don't know or understand about. With not engaging with the media, we almost shot ourselves in the foot by allowing this mythology to arise of Freemasonry being a secret, almost mafia-like organisation pulling the reins behind all sorts of closed doors, where the reality was actually almost complete opposite.
Where religion is perhaps about man's relationship with his God, so Freemasonry is about man's relationship with his fellow man, and it teaches us how we should treat one another, how we should help one another, and so on.
Freemasonry is a group of, in our case, men who have an interest in standards, in doing good in the community, in old-fashioned morality.
The oldest lodge in Essex is about 270 years old, is Angel Lodge, which meets in Colchester. That's where it started, still meets there and is thriving, and from 1736, I think it was. So it's been around for quite a while.
Most people would recognise that Freemasons raise a lot of money and do lots of charitable works in the community. There's the aspect of it being a secret society, and that obviously raises lots of questions.
An alternative way of life where they can contribute as well as be part of a series of meetings and get-togethers with like-minded people.
But there's a couple of strong theories. One strong theory is that it emerged out of the builders of King Solomon's Temple. A lot of the ritual is based on that story about the temple, and as you may know, some of the symbolism in Freemasonry is all about Masonic or Mason tools, like the square and compass and things like that.
To appear elite so that they can only they can be sure of having an elite type of person joining them.
Others think that free came from the idea of the guilds, where you became free of your craft and a master in your particular craft or trade. But the honest answer is we don't really know why. Probably three reasons why Freemasonry came to existence, which are what we call the three great principles, which in terms of the 18th century ritual were described as brotherly love, relief and truth.
Today's language, Yeah, friendship, very good friendship, and a ready friendship if you visit another lodge.
Brotherly love was being sociable, fraternity, the practice of tolerance, respecting other people's views, relief charity in all its forms, not just giving and giving out money, collecting money, giving it out, but also giving of time and talents in the service of the community. And truth is a striving for the highest standards in everything that you do. And we believe that those three things are equally important in Freemasonry and are the essence of it and are a good means of trying to build a good community for all.
Truth, it is honesty, being a good citizen.
Overall, very nice tenets, but after all, we are dealing with individuals here. So, in my experience, that wasn't always practiced wholly and sincerely.
I think if you were to ask 6 Freemasons why they joined, you'd get 6 differing rather than different reasons for it. For others, it is, of course, the principles, the opportunity of doing something in a constructive way within the community.
Most Freemasons are professional people, or if you like, self-employed entrepreneur types. They're normally well-educated or well-read, and very often they are responsible people.
Because we live in a high-speed world, which is constantly changing. We live in what's becoming an increasingly selfish world where we keep talking about the me generation. And they see Freemasonry as possibly providing 2 things. One, a sort of center of stability with tradition at the core of their lives, and 2, an opportunity of being committed to various projects within the community and of having the sort of standards which sadly seem to be rapidly disappearing from life in general.
Taking all these factors into consideration, if you're invited, you can then make an intellectual decision there and then whether it's for you or not. But in actual fact, you can't tell until you step through the door and been initiated and got the feel of Freemasonry to determine whether it's right for you or not. And this is basically on the understanding that some people enjoy and get a buzz of meeting new people and, of course, sparking professional relationships within Freemasonry, which has in the past been frowned upon, but is basically kept under wraps. The concept of Freemasonry is not to discuss business, but invariably you do, because what else do you talk about other than football?
I think there's the other aspect, that it is a society that's shrouded in some sort of secrecy and mystery, and I think that attracts people to want to find out anyway. Of course, they never really find out. Nobody will, of a higher level, will tell someone lower down what it is, and so you just have to go through level after level, eventually learning little bits that still really don't take you too far.
A little delegation of that lodge will go and visit the candidate. The candidate will be interviewed, and based on the right answers to certain questions, their name will then be put forward in the next lodge meeting on a democratic basis.
I think after a while you forget to start asking questions and what the main reason was why you joined. But that must be a factor at the beginning, that if you can't have something, you want it, basically.
I know other people who are Freemasons, and they've developed a good impression of what Freemasonry is and what it stands for. Maybe it's a relative, maybe it's a friend, but normally it's through personal contact of some sort or another that has given them a good impression of what Freemasonry is about and who are members.
The second, I think, valid point here is that if you're the type of person that enjoys the camaraderie and doesn't give a lot of thought to the depth and sincerity of Freemasonry in itself, then you'd love it.
Anyone can become a Freemason. The prime qualification for admission is that you must have a belief in a supreme being. You have to have a religious belief.
Any man of good reputation, honest, and over 21 years of age, who believes in a supreme being.
You need to be of good repute, so that would probably mean that you don't have a criminal record, you haven't been bankrupt, and also there's the word free, and that really is a historical aspect to it from the time when people were in service or slaves or what have you, and it's the notion of a free person.
It's very, very unusual that a nomination does not get through.
People with a criminal record can't become a Freemason. People under 18 years of age can't become a Freemason. And people who don't believe in a supreme being.
They welcome anybody that meet the criteria, and part of that is a belief in a supreme being. The problem is really from the Catholic point of view, where joining Freemasonry is banned. And that's really a historical thing. It goes right back to 1738, where Pope Clement XII issued a papal bull banning Catholics from joining Freemasonry. And that was followed a little bit later in 1884 by Pope Leo XIII that reinforced that. And I mean, my view is, if you look back in history, that is perhaps about membership and recruitment, and maybe a lot of people were attracted by this new idea of Freemasonry, that it was a sort of a universal religion, that it had a charitable aspect to that, and the Catholic religion sort of fought back by creating a new society that focused on charity and had its own sort of secret aspects to that, and put that forward as Catholics have no reason now to leave Catholicism and joining Freemasonry.
It's normally not denominational in any way, except when it comes to Jewish members who can only go to a certain level in Freemasonry, whereas the non-Jewish members, typically the Christian members, can go right to the peak. That's really where the only differentiation comes in.
Roman Catholic Church took against Freemasonry in the late 1730s, when the papacy was still a political as well as a religious body, and they saw Freemasonry and its ideals of brotherhood and community and tolerance as not being in agreement with the Church. That attitude softened quite considerably in the mid-20th century, and we have certainly never put a bar on Roman Catholics joining Freemasonry, and indeed now in Europe and America quite a substantial number of Roman Catholics are Freemasons.
Freemasonry requires a belief in a supreme being and encourages all of its members to continue with their normal religious activity.
It can say, look, technically we're not a religion. But why is there a requirement for belief in a supreme being, and why are lodges in other countries that don't have a belief in a supreme being, are members here barred from going to visit them? So why is that so important? Well, this is my personal view. My personal view is that when you first go into the lodge, part of your initiation ceremony, it does have religious overtones. There's sort of organ music, there's prayers, that they actually call prayers. The room is called a temple, for instance. And so it does have a sort of religious feel to it. The new candidate is told to, God will look after him and guide him through his ordeal. And that might feel a little bit scary actually for the new, because that makes him wonder what's actually going to happen to him. But so the fact that God is mentioned quite a lot, it features part of the ceremony. That becomes clear when you work all the way through the actual ceremony, and you come to the oath-taking process. And you may have seen in some of the standard library footage that the candidate is wearing a blindfold, for instance. While he's still wearing the blindfold, he is asked to confirm that what he's said is not just a promise, but it is an oath, and by kissing a book that's in front of him, which he can't see, but he's told it's the volume of the sacred law. So you would imagine that was something specific to Freemasonry. After that's happened, and if the candidate's hesitant, then the person standing next to him helps him, pushes his head down a little bit, and he's kneeling as well, and it's very much like church. And again, as I said, there's music, and it's very the blindfold second, and then you see that it is actually the book of your particular faith. So, you know, it'll either be the Old Testament or the New Testament or the Quran or whatever it is, whatever your religion is, the book that you've just kissed is the book of your... And that reinforces the power of the oath that you've just taken. Okay, and I think that's one of the reasons why right at the very beginning you have to say that you believe in a supreme being in order for that part of the ceremony to have quite a dramatic effect.
A supreme being in this instance does not refer to a race or religion. And when they refer to the great architect of the universe, it does not raise the question of Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism or Sikhism, which therefore allows other denominations to join Freemasonry without having to compromise in any way.
I think the belief in a supreme being is what binds us all. It gives us a basis from which we start from, and as part of it is about, in old-fashioned terms, morality. The one thing that is common to all the great religions of the world is the same basic morality, and that's what we're trying to emphasize. That's not to say that if you don't have a religious belief, you're immoral in any way or don't have moral standards, but that is the first sort of joint point that we have, if you like, that we all come from a background where faith is important, and then try to build on that in a secular way rather than a religious way.
I recognise the great architect as being God, but another member with another religion would maybe recognise that phrase as referring to his God. So it allows us to meet together and all from different religions and to enjoy our time together. It's a neutral statement.
People would come to think of the great architect of the universe as an entity in itself, because it features obviously all the way through all the ritual, and everything is done in the name of the great architect of the universe, and the all-seeing eye is the eye of the great architect of the universe. And of course that ties in, you know, architect and building and stonemasons and everything. So yes, the great architect of the universe is whatever is your God. And that's one, I mean, that was the accusation of the Catholics, that Freemasonry was a universal religion and sort of brought all men together, and that was counter to what they were preaching, which was obviously that, you know, Catholic religion was the main religion.
It's also a non-religious way of describing God, but primarily a way of describing a superior being that focuses around the concept of Freemasonry, as in the great architect.
Great architect is simply God. Because we have people of different religions, we use terms like the great architect, the grand geometrician, so which means that we can talk about God without offending the religious susceptibilities of anybody who's involved with the meeting. It's not, as it's often misunderstood, evidence that we have our own separate Masonic God. It's just a means of us being able to refer to God without upsetting those who are not, in my case, Christian.
We do get involved in community and supporting good things in the community, such as the hospice movement and air ambulance and things like that. We support, and they in turn support the whole community. So we are involved in the background. Freemasonry
will tell you that the biggest part they're playing in the community is charity. There's the Royal Masonic Charities, which focus on what used to be the Royal Masonic hospitals, which are now sadly gone. And the Mason who's elected to be in the chair in any given year, which you may be familiar with, is the person that presides over the lodge for a given year, elects to have contributions made to his own charities as well. The only anomaly I found with this is that for some strange reason, the vast majority of monies collected for charities within Freemasonry still seem to end up in the Royal Masonic charities rather than the outside and secular charities nominated by the person in a chair.
In the community, I think there are two ways that we have a contribution. One is by people following the principles of Freemasonry, by being tolerant, by believing in a sense of community, by behaving on the square, as we put it, with everybody they deal with in their lives. We hope to improve the community. And then, of course, there is a huge charity side attached to Freemasonry. We have 4 national Masonic charities, the main one of which, the Grand Charity, has 2 functions. One is to help Freemasons and dependents of Freemasons when they come into distress, but it's also Freemasonry's main channel for assisting non-Masonic charities and charitable projects in the community to a tune of something like £2.5 to £3 million a year.
I think the estimate is about 10% of the money that is raised is applied to non-Masonic charitable situations. So perhaps there was, a flood or disaster in another part of the world, then there'll be a contribution from Freemasons. But most of the money sort of stays within Freemasonry for the benefit of Freemasons.
The charity works at all levels. Grand Lodge is United Grand Lodge of England, covers all of England and Wales, and we have national charities. But we also have provincial Grand Lodges, such as Essex, Provincial Grand Lodge of Essex. We have our own charities. We have 2 or 3 charities that work specifically within our province.
Then on top of that, on a local basis, you'll find lodges will adopt local charities, not just giving money, but will give things in terms of time and talents. They'll adopt the local old people's home or the local children's home or a local hospital, and they'll go in and do things like cutting the grass, doing the decorating, or just being a sympathetic ear for people who are in those circumstances and aren't able to get out.
The other charities nominated were I'll use the word bog standard charities like cancer research and raising money for disadvantaged children and the elderly.
I think majority of Freemasons join Freemasons not really for charitable. They might say that, but perhaps they feel it might be helpful to them in business or career progression. But the right thing to say is this: I want to join a charitable organisation.
Charity is a natural repercussion of our membership. We, as I said earlier, we select good men, honest men, and part of our principles are to help other people.
Charity, I think, is important because it's one very practical and tangible way of providing health within the community. We believe that Freemasonry came together as a means of bridging the gap in a period, the late early 1600s, when politics and religion split communities.
This may be viewed as a betterment of their public image, to give them a visage, if you like, that they are just as caring as what's going on in the outside world as there are within their own society. With the amount of money that is raised, it seems, I suppose, logical that charities have to be considered, and I'm sure that is, in the nicest possible way, their most sincerest intention.
Well, you can't actually just phone up the head office and say, I'd like to join, please. Can you send me an application form? It doesn't work like that. They will tell you need to find somebody that you know and to ask them. And that's actually the key. The key is that someone has to ask to join rather than a recruitment drive as such. So you need to ask in your family, maybe an uncle, you might ask within your workplace, some of the managers. You need to find somebody that's already in there and ask to become a member.
If you wait for us to invite you, you quite possibly will never become a Freemason. We are allowed to prompt, but only once. Strictly speaking, you should ask. If you're interested in Freemasonry, you want to know more about it, or you think you might like to join, ask. Ask a Freemason.
In these days of the internet, increasingly, because we operate our own websites and there are something like 2.5 million references to Freemasonry on the World Wide Web. Increasingly, we and other Masonic organizations are getting people who've seen it, think it might be interesting, just cold calling. And what we usually do then is to try to introduce them to some Freemasons in the area they're living in, to develop their interest and see if it is something that they really want to get involved in.
You cannot ask to join, you will be invited. Once you're invited, a little delegation will come round to your home. They will sit and have a cup of tea with you, and they will ask you some leading questions such as, do you believe in God? And apparently the answer to that question is, if it's no, they have to rephrase the question so that you answer yes. In other words, they are actively seeking membership, but they have to follow a certain routine, if you must.
You've got a responsibility to the lodge to make sure it runs smoothly. As the lodge itself, there's a number of jobs in the lodge. They're called offices, and these offices play a role. The officers play a role in the ritual, and it's their responsibility to learn their ritual and to help others learn. And they attend weekly meetings, usually in rooms above pubs, called Lodge of Instructions, where it's an informal session, but it's a training session. And so there's a responsibility to help each other and practice and get it all right, because on the day in the actual lodge, it's a bit like an amateur dramatic play.
You might be the secretary, so then you'd be responsible for doing the minutes, or you might be the treasurer, and then you're responsible for counting the money. But that's like any club or association. We have those officers who do take on various responsibilities that help to keep the organisation going.
The responsibilities are basically outlined at the initiation ceremony about following, as you stated earlier, brotherly love, relief and truth. But one might say that these are tenets which we all should be adhering to as members of society anyway. The positives are that it gives you a sense of purpose if you don't already have a sense of purpose. It gives you a membership if you don't already have membership or associations with other societies. It gives you a reason to get ready 4 or 5 or 6 times a year. It allows you access to other people that you normally would never get a chance to meet. Those are the positives. There are lots of positives if that's what you want.
Definitely positive aspects. Obviously, there is the charitable side, and people benefit from that. A percentage goes to non-Masonic charities, and people within Freemasonry that fall on hard times can solicit for some assistance, and that's a very positive thing. I think for a lot of older men, it's their social network. They look forward to the meetings, to the meal afterwards, to meet up with friends, and they'll suffer the ritual and all of that in order to be part of this group. And there's a lot of camaraderie and stories are told over dinner. So that's a very positive thing, I think, and that's very useful for people who are perhaps otherwise lonely. There's other aspects where people get an opportunity. Perhaps in ordinary life they haven't made anything of themselves in terms of seniority in their business, but within Freemasonry they can become quite a significant person. Not only master of their lodge, they can go on and get involved in higher levels and gain respect and trust, and some of them learn to speak in public, and it's very good for their confidence. So I think there's quite a lot of positive aspects. I mean, the only question really is, well, surely you could still get all of that without the secrecy and the control of someone's free will.
It brings out the best in men. None of us are perfect. Some possibly get nearer to that than others, but Freemasonry encourages us to be as good as we're able to be. And I think in all of the things that we do, all of the occasions when we meet, that's what Freemasonry does. It brings out the best in all of us.
I think the main positives are, if you like, progress through Freemasonry is a bit like a journey, and it's a sort of journey of self-discovery. I think a lot of people find, as they go through the various offices in a lodge to become master of a lodge for a year, I've known people in my time in Freemasonry who have come in very shy, and become accomplished public speakers. They learn how to run a meeting, they learn how to organize a meeting. They get involved in community projects which they might not have otherwise done through their Freemasonry. I think there are a lot of positives other than just providing a sort of sociability and a social network.
I've been a Freemason for 32 years and I'm not aware of any downside at all.
There are no downsides for a person who enjoys Freemasonry. There are only downsides for a person who doesn't enjoy Freemasonry, and the only answer to that is just quit. And often when a resignation does arrive at the secretary's desk of a lodge, the first thing that happens is an inquiry. Why are you leaving? And very often a number of reasons, but it seems to be a phase. People join Freemasonry, they may spend 10, 15, 20, 25 or 30 years in Freemasonry, and it comes to a point where they either just stop going or they actually resign.
It does take up a lot of time and it does cost a lot of money. Time is, that's why right at the very beginning that the committee visit the home and talk to the wife and get her commitment to the amount of time. There is a lot of time away because not only, a lodge might meet just 4 times or 5 times a year, but there'd be weekly sessions for, if you're involved in the actual ritual, then you've got to practice your line like you would in any amateur dramatic play. You've got to do lots of rehearsals, so it does take up a lot of time. Secondly, people you meet in business or other social situations that way are likely to invite you to their lodge, and visiting each other's lodges is quite an important aspect. And so not only is there time in your lodge, there's time in other lodges. And if you progress up the Masonic ladder and get involved in provincial Grand Lodge or in London, it's called London Grand Rank, then there's more meetings to attend, so it can certainly take up a lot of time. In terms of money, there's various aspects. We've already talked a little about charity, and that's certainly one thing you have to take into account. There's your lodge fees. There's fees for the meals. Every time that there's a meeting, there's a meal. And if you have guests, then you are likely to pay the full value of the meal for your guest. There's the clothes that you wear, called the regalia, and that has expense associated. And every time if you go on to other degrees in Freemasonry, then you need to get yourself different regalia and ritual books. So there's quite a lot in terms of the money involved there. So yes, it's time and money are 2 aspects. Other aspects in terms of a negative thing that I think anyway is really comes down to the individual and this whole question about free will and what really is happening in the ritual that binds people to the organisation, so that even people that have left, if you ask them, so now you've left, now tell us everything that goes on, they can't bring themselves, even though they might believe it's all mumbo jumbo, that there's something that's preventing them. And and I think that sort of touches on a little bit about hypnosis and aspects like that, and that's something I'm uncomfortable with. So I think that's a negative aspect that we're all saying all the time that we're doing everything with our own free will, and I have a question mark over that, just on a sort of a personal basis.
The basic principles have always been the same, but we've had an uncanny knack of being able to adapt ourselves to the particular time that we're living in, and changing what I would call the outward forms, some of the customs, some of the way we dress, that sort of thing, but still maintaining true to the 3 great principles as basic what we call landmarks, which can't be altered.
The biggest change, in fact, occurred at the very time that I joined Freemasonry. There was a tremendous concern that Freemasonry was being used as a way of sheltering members of Freemasonry from crimes they may have committed, which would then give them either a lenient sentence or a complete let-off if it was known that they were Freemasons. Freemasonry, for this reason, came under tremendous pressure in the press, and as a result, Freemasonry decided to open its doors, and some of the wording of the initiation ceremony was changed to suit the new stance that Freemasonry wanted to give the public. Typically, if one divulged the secrets of the inner workings of the temple, one would have his tongue cut out, was the old wording. Under the new wording, it was if one divulged the secrets of the inner workings of the temple, one would, now what's the word I should think of, supposedly have his tongue cut out.
Freemasonry describes itself as a system of morality illustrated by symbols and veiled in allegory, and that's a standard phrase. And what that means is that in Freemasonry we're working with the stonemason, and so the tools of that particular trade are used to illustrate certain morals.
Symbolism is very much a part of Freemasonry, simply because when Freemasonry was developing, the way of passing on ideas and principles was by means of allegory and symbolism.
All the tools that are used in Freemasonry are symbolic. The plumb rule, used to symbolize being straight and narrow and honest, and they use the symbolism, or I should say they use the tools as ways of demonstrating how you should be in life and how you should be in Freemasonry.
And of course, with Freemasonry, it helps it link all the way back to the stories of the building of the temple and the tools that were used at the time. In 1946, George VI's stamp has actually Masonic symbols on it. That was to do with the recognising the end of the war and everything else. And so that's quite interesting. And that has the square and compasses. And that's of particular importance to Freemasonry, because the position of the square and compasses just indicate at what level somebody is within Freemasonry. So that obviously indicated that very strongly that was a Masonic symbol. And there are other symbols on that stamp as well.
It's a powerful way to remind people of what it is that they're expected to believe in. We have a lot of symbolism attached to Freemasonry. The most common one, of course, is the square and compasses, which you see on Masonic buildings, you see on Masonic medals. They are used as pegs to point a moral story within the ceremonies. The square is about equality and uprightness, as the compasses symbolize morality. You get the all-seeing eye, which seems to worry the conspiracy theorists.
You know, within the lodge itself, it just reminds people that you know, that there's the eye above is observing their behaviour, not only in the lodge but throughout their whole life, of course. And the fact that symbol appears on the dollar bill has given rise to quite a lot of, you know, conspiracy theories about the founding fathers of the United States being prominent Freemasons, and some of them were.
The all-seeing eye is a very old symbol, not peculiar to Freemasonry, for God or representative of the deity.
See, God denotes religion. Supreme Being denotes non-denominational, individual thinking attitude. So it's a clever way of putting things, if you like.
Pyramid is just an old symbol for wisdom. It was thought that wisdom came from the East in the 1600s and 1700s. The East was Egypt, and what symbolizes Egypt? The pyramid. So it's a sign of God being over all and people trying to rule with wisdom.
I think the public outside of Freemasonry still believe that there's a support network that helps people progress through the career path in the civil service, and that they'd get a better, you know, preferential treatment. Even Stephen Knight in his book suggested that the KGB infiltrated Freemasonry in order to progress themselves through the civil service. Similarly, you know, would somebody get off a motoring offence if you were pulled over for speeding and the policeman and yourself exchanged words and it became obvious that you were both Freemasons? You know, would he be more lenient to the driver?
Yes, we do help one another, but specifically we're told to help one another within the bounds of what is legal and what is fair and proper.
Is there an area of corruption? Possibly. And you know, you've got to say that if you've got council officials who have got the responsibility for issuing tenders, and on the other hand, builders and architects, all meeting in a sort of a secret environment where they're able to discuss business, it can certainly lead to people feeling that there's an unfair advantage. I think there's a reason for the secrecy, and I think it's to protect really the close examination of the ritual.
The initiation ceremony is similar to our other ceremonies, and they are plays. It's like a very formalised 2-act play, and these plays teach moral lessons. Instead of telling a story to teach good lessons, we use a play, and the officers of the lodge each take their part in that play.
There are 3 ceremonies by which you become what we call a Master Mason. They are reputed to be very secretive, but actually you can walk to the Masonic regalia shop across the road, go in and buy a copy of the printed ritual. The rituals have been in the public domain since about the 1720s. We regard them as being private for the simple reason that part of the shared experience we have is of going through with a certain amount of not knowing all the detail. If your proposer and seconder and the interview committee have done their job properly, you will know a great deal of general information about Freemasonry, but there's that slight frisson of going through something where you're not quite sure what is going to happen, and is part of the shared experience we have as Freemasons.
The thing that keeps the organisation together is about recruiting new individuals and getting them to become sort of subservient to the organisation. And that the ritual on one level is a story about morality, and we use stories from the temple or associated with biblical times. But if you actually analyse the ritual from a sort of psychological point of view, you can see the same sort of aspects that you might find if you studied a cult, how you might recruit a member and gain their allegiance and stop them questioning, and being part of there's the them and the us.
The ceremonies are a slightly dramatic way of putting to the candidate the principles and tenets that we believe in as Freemasons. People often say, well, why do you still do it today? And it's quite simple, because it's a very powerful way of impressing on somebody on the seriousness of what they're doing, but is not done in any sort of sense of mocking the candidate or trying to upset him or embarrass him in any way. And the one thing he will know is that everybody who has come in, whether it's the Grand Master or the newest initiate, has come into Freemasonry in exactly the same way.
The initiation ceremony is predominantly done with the candidate being blindfolded, with one shoe off and one with a slip-on, his right trouser leg rolled up, his left chest is bared, and of course he's blindfolded. And he is led into the temple by what is normally called the junior deacon, and the junior deacon takes him round and introduces him as a poor candidate in a state of darkness who has been well and worthily recommended, is the words used. And the reason for all the changes in the attire is, A, you're not allowed to see the temple until you are shown the light, which is when the blindfold is removed. The bearing of the chest is to indicate that you are not a woman, and the concept of wearing a slip-on when coming into the temple is to humble you, to make you feel just a little bit uncomfortable while being taken around and before you had your dignity restored, so to speak.
My view is that there's a flaw in the oath, and that when you actually analyse it, that you're not really obligated, because I can't see how, when you're giving your oath, when you're only saying a few words at a time and you're repeating the words that someone else has given you, and it doesn't make any sense until afterward, at the end, when you look at the whole thing and see what you've actually committed yourself to. But at the time, they're little chunks, and they don't really make much sense, and they're sort of old English type words and obscure words. So I debate whether you really did take the oath of your own free will, because the whole ceremony up to that point, without going into detail of the mechanics, is a manipulation of you psychologically, and it does prepare you to willingly or even to think that you accepted that oath of your own free will, because that is repeated to you so often. So the aspects of the ceremony involve some discomfort, some embarrassment, lots of loud noise. You're blindfolded, so there's a state of sensory deprivation. It's a very confusing thing. There is one person that steadily guides you and whispers in your ear what the right answers are to give at certain questions. You become dependent upon that person. So by the time you get to take your oath, you're already in the mode of repeating what someone else has already said to you. And as I've already said, you then kiss the book, the volume of the sacred law, which happens to be the Bible of your own particular faith.
There is a lot more public understanding of what Freemasonry is. People can find out quite easily a great deal of information about Freemasonry through the internet and through Masonic websites.
Even Tolstoy's War and Peace has enough of Freemasonry ritual in it that a lodge in New Zealand was able to use that to actually put on a ceremony. So it's been in the public domain for a long time. Even though it's in the public domain, a Freemason still won't answer the question. They'll say, well, look, you can go and look in the public library if you want. So, yeah, I think it's been two aspects. I think it has revealed things that people haven't wanted to reveal. Blogs are a standard thing now on any subject. There's, whether it's the royal family or whatever. You've got a lot of negativity. But I think it's also provided opportunities for people to meet with each other. And just as a point of interest, there's a new feature on the internet, something called Second Life, which is a virtual world. It's like a three-dimensional internet where each person has a character. And there are lodges in this Second Life, as well as churches and buildings that sell clothes and things. So, because there's 7 million residents or members, it represents real life, and whatever your interest is represented in there. So, it's quite interesting that there's Masonic lodges within Second Life.
I get a little sad sometimes when people still continue to use the old myths to attack, particularly in the political arena. But in fact, some of the conspiracy theory sites you see on the web, we roll with laughter when we read them, because anybody who's done the slightest bit of reading about Freemasonry knows straight away they are conspiracy theories.